بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على أشرف الأنبياء سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله تعالى به. ثم يجب له تعالى 7 صفات تسمى صفات المعاني، وهي القدرة والإرادة المتعلقان بجميع الممكنات. This is where we stopped last week, where we were talking about Sifatul Ma'ani, the qualitative attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first 2 attributes we mentioned were Al-Qudratu, divine power, and Al-Iradatu, divine will. And the author rahimahullah ta'ala states Al-Muta'alliqani bi Jami' al-Mumkinat, that these 2 attributes are associated with all possibilities, meaning the divine power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not instantiate, bring into existence impossibilities. And in the same way, the divine power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not connected to necessary things. If we said the divine power is associated with impossibilities, bringing impossibilities into existence, then those impossibilities will no longer remain impossible but will become possible. So the mustahil, the impossible, would become mumkin. And if we said the divine power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected with necessary things, then this would mean the necessary would no longer remain necessary but would become possible. Therefore, the divine power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is only connected to possibilities. This is another reasoning behind this belief. And al-iradatu, divine will, is also connected to possibilities, not to impossibilities and necessities. When there are 2 matters which are possible, the divine will make the decision of which of those 2 matters will come into existence, and the divine power, al-qudratu, will instantiate, bring into existence that which has been selected. So the divine will bring in, will or bring about the choice of which of the 2 possibilities will be brought into existence. The divine power will instantiate that, bring it into existence. This is the difference between the 2. So existence or non-existence is determined by the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with His divine will make the decision of either bringing something into existence or taking it out of existence. And al-qudra, divine power, will instantiate, bring into existence that thing. Also, what we mentioned was وَالْعِلْمُ الْمُتَعَلِّقُ بِجَمِيعِ الْوَاجِبَاتِ وَالْجَائِزَاتِ وَالْمُسْتَحِيلَاتِ, that divine knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attached to essential things, permissible things, and impossible things. Why is this? Because the divine attribute of knowledge is not an effective attribute, sifa mu'athira. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing we will do something, does not mean He has forced us to do something. Now the Mu'tazila, an early sect in Islam, they held the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His divine will associate with those things which will not happen. For instance, the iman, the belief of Abu Jahl or Abu Lahab, they believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have the divine will of the faith of Abu Jahl. But this in effect would lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being demoted to being incapable of making Abu Jahl or Abu Lahab believe. While the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew of the disbelief of Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tasked them to believe, gave them the taklif, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them mukallaf to believe, but He knew they will not believe. However, He did not have the divine will of them believing, al-irada. If He had willed that they believe, then they would have believed. This is a difference between Mu'tazila and Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah will say that the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring into existence whatever He wills. While the Mu'tazila, they say that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills for something, it is not necessary for it to come into existence. This of course is logically absurd. This claim of the Mu'tazila is absurd. Then the author states, وَالْحَيَاةُ وَهِيَ لَا تَتَعَلَّقُ بِشَيْءٍ. The attribute of divine life. وَهِيَ لَا تَتَعَلَّقُ بِشَيْءٍ. This attribute is not connected to anything. What this means is al-irada, for instance, divine will connect itself to possibilities. Whether that possibility has been given existence or not, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His divine will determine what should come into existence and what should go out of existence. Divine power, al-qudra, is attached to those things which are brought into existence. Al-ilm, divine knowledge, will be connected to possibilities, impossibilities and necessities. While al-hayatu is not connected to anything. But remember, Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah state regarding these attributes that they are al-qa'ima bi-dhat. Al-qa'ima bi-dhat, which means established with the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or established with the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these attributes. Based upon this reasoning, the Mu'tazila rejected these attributes. They said, how can you ascribe attributes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which are eternal? This in turn would lead to numerous eternal beings. So the Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah replied by saying, we do not believe these attributes are independent beings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, they are divine attributes established with the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That meaning the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are not independent beings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Mu'tazila held the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadir with His that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is murid with His that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alim with His that. They did not believe that al-qudra, al-irada, al-ilm, these are divine attributes. They said everything is His that, meaning Him being all-knowing, Him being all-powerful, Him being all-willing. All these are not attributes, but are the self, the that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a distinction between the beliefs of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah and the Mu'tazila. But when we say al-hayatu, the attribute of divine life, this attribute is not connected to anything, but it validates for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have these divine attributes. Because if He did not have the divine attribute of al-hayat, divine life, then He could not be murid, he could not be Qadir, all powerful, he could not be Al-Alim, all knowing. It validates for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be described with these divine attributes. Then the author states, وَالسَّمْعُ وَالْبَصَرُ الْمُتَعَلِّقَانِ بِجَمِيعِ الْمَوْجُودَاتِ, that divine hearing and divine sight that are attached to all existing things, These attributes of divine hearing and divine sight are established from textual evidence. إِنَّهُ هُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, or لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, that there is nothing like him, yet he is all hearing and all seeing. This is from a textual source from the Quran. Otherwise, if rationally speaking, a person would, by ascribing knowledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or affirming knowledge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a person could not infer the attribute of hearing and seeing. But hearing and seeing are divine attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does this mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possesses organs? We already covered the attribute مُخَالَفَتُهُ لِلْحَوَادِثِ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in opposition to contingent things. Or al-qiyamu bin-nafs, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is self-established. This would mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have and does not need organs. In order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hear everything, He subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need an ear, an instrument or a tool. In order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to see everything, He subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need an organ, an eye or an instrument or a tool. Also, the divine hearing and divine sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected to everything which is beyond what we conceive as being sight and hearing. For instance, our hearing is limited to sound waves, to what our organ, our ear can pick up, our eardrums can pick up, the waves our ear can detect. But the divine hearing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond this. The divine sight is beyond what we pick up. We pick up colors and shapes. The divine, when we say sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-basar, the divine sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond what we can conceive. Therefore, we would say between knowledge, divine hearing and divine sight, there is a connection in the sense that what is known. So the divine knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses impossibilities, possibilities and necessities. The divine hearing and sight cover everything which is existent. Now what is related is that a Jewish theologian came to one of the towns of the Muslims in the early period, and he said, before everything in creation existed, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala see with His divine sight? And what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hear with His divine hearing? And he said, the Jew said, I asked many people this question, they were unable to answer it. So he asked one of the theologians, Muslim theologians from that town. The Muslim theologian said, before the existence of creation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His divine attributes existed as they exist now. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to see Himself and hear Himself. So as-sam'u wal-basar, hearing and seeing, is connected to whatever exists. So what exists is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His divine attributes, and then whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought into existence. The author states, وَالْكَلَامُ الَّذِي لَيْسَ بِحَرْفٍ وَلَا صَوْتٍ وَيَتَعَلَّقُ بِمَا يَتَعَلَّقُ بِهِ الْعِلْمُ مِنَ الْمُتَعَلِّقَاتِ. Divine speech, the seventh attribute from the qualitative attributes, Sifatul Ma'ani. He states divine speech that is not a letter, الذي ليس بحرف ولا صوت, and neither a voice, ويتعلق, and it is connected بما, with that, يتعلق به العلم, by that which knowledge is connected, من المتعلقات. Knowledge is connected to possible, impossible, and necessary. So the divine speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inform us of what is possible, impossible, and necessary. When we recite Al-Quran Al-Kareem, we will read about possibilities, impossibilities, and necessary things. So the divine speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is described as not being a letter and not being a voice. This is the divine attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The divine attribute which is established with the self, that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not described as being a voice or a letter. The Mu'tazila here also held a divergent view. Their view was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could create, when we say Kalamullah, what this means is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates in something speech. When He creates something, when He creates speech inside of something, that is termed as being Kalamullah. They did not hold the Kalam in the way that Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah held the belief regarding the divine attribute of speech. The Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah said Kalam, divine speech, is an attribute which is established with the self of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while they said it is created. And whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us of something, this is from His divine knowledge. And whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits or orders us to do something, this is from His divine will. So they said the Quran therefore is created. And within the Quran we have divine orders and we have information. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us regarding something, this is from His divine knowledge. When He prohibits something, this is from His divine will. But the Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah said Kalamullah, the divine speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is an attribute, an endless, eternal attribute which is established with the self. These are the 7 attributes which are known as Sifatul Ma'ani, which were Al-Qudra, Al-Irada, Al-Ilmu, Al-Hayatu, Al-Sam'u, Al-Basaru, Al-Kalamu. After this, the author mentions 7 other attributes. He states, ثُمَّ سَبْعٌ يَجِبُ لَهُ تَعَالَى, then 7 which are essential for Him, the Most High. ثُمَّ سَبْعُ صِفَاتٍ تُسَمَّى صِفَاتٍ مَعْنَوِيَّةً, then there are 7 attributes which are known as predicative attributes. وَهِيَ مُلَازِمَةٌ لِلسَّبْعِ الْأُولَى, these are necessary for the first 7. وَهِيَ, and they are كَوْنُهُ تَعَالَى قَادِرًا, Allah the Most High being Qadir, all powerful, Muridan, all willing, Aliman, being all knowing, Hayyan, being living, Sami'an, all hearing, Basiran, all seeing, wa mutakalliman, speaking with the divine speech. Why these are known as as-sifatul ma'nawiyya, predicative attributes? What this means is that these attributes have an underlying reason. The underlying reason of these attributes are the 7 attributes we have just mentioned, which are sifatul ma'ani. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being Qadir, all powerful, is due to His attribute of al-Qudra. By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having the divine attribute of al-Qudra, we know that He subhanahu wa ta'ala is Qadir, all powerful. Because of the divine attribute of al-Irada, divine will, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Murid, which is the one who wills. And due to the attribute of al-ilm, divine knowledge, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is alim. And because of the attribute of al-hayatu, divine life, we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hayy. Of course, when we say divine life, this would not mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in need of a heart or a spirit, the way a human being would be alive. A human being is alive with the spirit in the body and the heart beating. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like Him. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That there is no similarity to Him. There is nothing that bears resemblance to Him. So He does not need a heart or a spirit to keep Him alive. وَسَمِيعًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being all hearing, due to the attribute of as-sam'u, divine hearing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being basiran, all seeing, due to the divine attribute of al-basar. So in conclusion, the author has mentioned 20 attributes, but like we said previously, these 20 attributes are not the only attributes for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are 20 attributes which everyone should know, which were initially we mentioned as-sifatun nafsiyya, which was al-wujud, divine existence. Then as-sifatu salbiyya, the negating attributes, which were al-qidam, al-baqa, the eternal existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the endless existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mukhalafatu lil hawadith, his opposition to the contingent, وَقِيَامُهُ تَعَالَى بِنَفْسِهِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the aseity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being self-established, وَالْوَحْدَانِيَّة, divine oneness. These 5 attributes were known as as-sifatu salbiyya. Then we covered the sifatul ma'ani, the predicative qualitative attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which were al-qudratu, al-iradatu, al-ilmu, al-hayatu, al-sam'u, al-basaru, al-kalam. And then the predicative attributes, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being qadir, murid, alim, hayy, sami' and basir. These are 20 attributes in total. Next, in the coming lessons, what we will cover. First, we will cover what is impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the impossibilities, mustahilat. And after this, in detail, we will go over each attribute again, but with the evidence for each attribute. So when covering al-wujud, we will refute atheists. When we will cover al-qidam, we will refute other religions that do not believe in the eternalness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we will cover al-baqa, we will refute those groups which do not believe in the endless attribute that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remain forever. They do not believe in this. When we will cover mukhalafatuhu lil hawadith, his opposition to the contingent, will refute those groups that believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has resemblance to creation. And like this, through every attribute, there are groups that reject certain aspects of each attribute. Now previously also I mentioned anwa' shirk, that shirk, polytheism, is 6 types, and the author mentioned this in his book Al-Muqaddimat, short introductions regarding polytheism. The first shirk was shirku istiqlal. This is when someone establishes 2 independent gods, like the Majus, the Magians. They believe in the God who creates good and the God who creates bad. This is blatant shirk, polytheism. If someone believes independence of one creator of another. The other shirk is shirku tab'id. This is when someone compounds more than one God as one entity. Like the Christians, they believe in the Trinity, yet they say they believe in one entity, one creator. That one creator is 3, but they still say they are monotheistic by believing in 3 entities in one. So this is known as shirku tab'id. Then you have shirku taqreeb. This is worshipping someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to attain a proximity or closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is like the polytheists before Islam. They would worship the idols and say, we only worship them in order to attain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is also shirk. Then you have shirk taqleed. This is when someone worships someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, blind following other people. This is known as shirk taqleed, the polytheism of blind faith. These four by agreement are kufr, disbelief. If anyone believes in any one of these aspects of shirk, he commits disbelief. The fifth shirk is shirkul asbab. Shirkul asbab is associating means to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What this means is that some people may believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed a nature inside of things, and those things then act of their own nature. Now, if the person believes things are acting of their own nature in of themselves, without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having created that nature and having created the effect in that thing, then such a person has also fallen into shirk. For instance, the observable universe around us. We as Muslims, as Sunni Muslims, believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the light and keeps the light emanating. But this type of shirk would mean that someone believes the light emanates in of itself. This would be shirk. But if someone holds the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed the nature of the light inside of it and then it is independent, a type of deism, believing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created things and then has left them, then there is a dispute regarding his disbelief. This is the belief of the Mu'tazila. They believed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made fire burn in its nature. So fire burns once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it as such. While Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah hold the belief that fire burns and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sustains its burning. At all times it is sustained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Mu'tazila hold the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed the nature of burning inside of fire, and now fire burns independently of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regarding this, Al-Imam Sanusi rahimallahu ta'ala states regarding this, فَهُوَ فَاسِقٌ مُبْتَدِعٌ وَفِي كُفْرِ قَوْلًا. If someone says such a thing, he is a transgressor, an innovator, and regarding his disbelief there are two positions, whether he is a disbeliever or not. And the sixth type of shirk is shirkul aghrad, polytheism of purpose, which is intention, that when someone does an action for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an action for creation, in this case the person by agreement is not a disbeliever but is a sinner. So these were the six anwa'u shirki that Al-Imam Sanusi rahimahullah mentions. Next week inshallah we will cover the impossibilities for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also usulul kufri wal bid'ah, the principles of what lead to disbelief and innovation. He mentioned 7 principles that lead a person to disbelief or innovation. So these, today we mentioned the anwa'u shirk, types of shirk. There were a few questions, but before we go on to the written questions, are there any questions from the brothers? The brothers asking regarding the incident with the Jew. The Jew approached a theologian in a Muslim city and said, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything in creation, what was he looking at and what was he hearing? This was his question, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all hearing and all seeing. So the Muslim theologian responded by saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was looking at his divine self and divine attributes and hearing his divine self and divine attributes. This was the response from the Muslim theologian. Is that clear? Any other questions? Okay, we have a written one. The question is, a mad person is not a mukallaf. What about a mukallaf who rejected the truth, but later he became mad and died as a mad person? In this case, when the mad person would be resurrected, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge him based upon the days of his sanity. When he had sanity and was mukallaf, what decision did he make? The divine judgment will be based on that, with the conditions of taklif, of tasking. What are the conditions? The conditions are that the person is saying the correct message of Islam reached him, a mutawatir, mass transmitted aspect of Islam reached him, and in such a case the person is mukallaf. So if he made the choice of disbelieving while he was sane and then became insane, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge him according to his sanity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next question is, quoting Surah Al-A'raf, by the way, Surah Al-An'am, Surah Al-Anfal is chapter number 8 of the Quran, verse 23 of...
Somebody got a car in the car park.
Citroen. Who's got a Citroen parked in the car park?
Okay, thank you. Second. When you finish, you're locking yourself too?
Yeah, we'll lock up.
Thank you very much.
Surah Al-Anfal is chapter number 8 of the Quran. Check Surah Al-Anfal, verse 23. Surah Al-Anfal, verse 23. And also in Surah Al-Mulk, كُلَّمَا أُلْقِيَ فِيهَا فَوْجٌ سَأَلَهُمْ خَزَنَتُهَا لَمْ يَأْتِكُمْ نَذِيرٌ. If you read the Surah Al-Mulk, you will find that whenever a group of people are thrown into hellfire, they will be asked regarding by the guardian of hellfire, did a warner come to you? What do they say in response? قَالُوا بَلَا قَدْ جَاءَنَا نَذِيرٌ فَكَذَّبْنَا وَقُلْنَا مَا نَزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. That of course a warner came to us and we said Allah has not revealed anything. In the same way, if you check other verses of the Quran like Surah Al-Anfal verse 23, you will find interesting verses throughout the Quran regarding the mukallafeen. This question asks regarding the creation in 6 days, and that the Quran, he has a translation, indeed your Lord is Allah who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and then he rose over the throne. We know Allah is not contained within time and space and direction. So could the Shaykh enlighten us in regard to this verse? People can misunderstand this verse. The 6 days of creation is in reference to the created thing. First thing is, many people misunderstand the word days being used. في ستة أيام, in 6 days. Ayyam here refers to a period of time. What is the evidence for this? The evidence for this is that Yawmul Qiyamah has been termed as a Yawm, a day. Yet we know Yawmul Qiyamah will last for thousands of years according to the years of earth. In the same way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stating Sittati Ayyam, in 6 days, this refers to a time period. The time period is not referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the instantiating, coming into existence of the heavens and the earth. That if someone were to look at the creation of the heavens and the earth, the time period in which they came about could be timed as 6 periods of time. Fi sittati ayyam. Is that clear? Are there any other questions? Okay, next week inshallah we'll continue जज़ल्लाहु अन्ना सय्यदना मुहम्मदन सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि व आलिहि व सल्लम मा हुवा अहलुहु जज़ल्लाहु अन्ना सय्यदना मुहम्मदन सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि व आलिहि व सल्लम मा हुवा अहलुहु जज़ल्लाहु अन्ना सय्यदना मुहम्मदन सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि व आलिहि व सल्लम मा हुवा अहलुहु सुब्हान रब्बिका रब्बिल इज्जति अम्मा यसिफून व सलामुन अलल मुरसलीन वल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन।